Hello my friends and welcome back to Garhdo Goes Geek. On today's episode, just a quick little review for you where I want to discuss Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I finally got around to watching season 1. I think it is one of the best things I have seen in a long time for Star Trek. Definitely one of the best Star Trek series I've watched in a long time, and possibly one of the best episodic series that I've watched for a very long time, but I'll explain a bit more as I get into it. So, as it's been a while since I've talked about Star Trek on the podcast, I think the last time I did was for the anniversary back in 2021, I believe, for the 55th anniversary. So yeah, 2021. So yeah, I haven't spoken about Star Trek in quite a while, and obviously back then I mentioned how, in fact, that original episode has recently been updated with some more recent thoughts on the shows that had come out since then. But that still didn't include much commentary on Strange New Worlds, but didn't include a reaction to the trailer, because I think we'd had the trailer and the cast announcements by the time I recorded that. So that's now in the original episode if you haven't heard it. But yeah, basically at the time, I think we'd had, at the time I made that episode, we'd had the first 2 seasons of Star Trek Discovery, which I had seen. The 3rd season of Star Trek Discovery, I think, had come out, but due to the really shady thing that Paramount Plus did, where they were launching Paramount Plus, so they took it off of Netflix on international territories, like a few days before release, which was still a really, really terrible thing to do. I think it was a really bad PR move. It was just a very horrible thing to do, especially because, like, as I believe I said at the time, the cast were out, promoting it at the time. So they were going into territories like Europe and Australia and promoting Discovery season 3, and that was coming soon on Netflix. And then it was pulled, like last minute, it was pulled. And obviously at the time, Paramount Plus only existed in North America. So yeah, it was pretty terrible. And they did eventually release a deal with Pluto to air it, and obviously now Paramount Plus is available in those territories. But yeah, pretty bad move all round. We also have Lower Decks that had been on. It had its first season, and I think it was airing its second season at the time I was reviewing that. That was on Amazon. And Star Trek Picard, which is had its first season by that point. That was also on Amazon, as well as the Short Treks seasons. Although they're not, I'm having real trouble finding those anywhere. Like, they seem to get taken off of YouTube, or they're region locked if they are on there, and they don't, like, the first season were all put on Netflix with Discovery. Probably because a couple of them, at the very least, played into plot threads for the second season. But all the ones for the season 2 of Short Treks, I think one of them is on the Picard home release, the Blu-ray DVD, which is called Children of Mars, which is like a prequel to Picard. Like, that's on there. But the others aren't, and most of the others actually relate to what we're talking about today, which is Strange New Worlds. So that's a bit weird. So yeah, Strange New Worlds was the 4th or 5th series. I can't remember, because the other one is Star Trek Prodigy, which is a CGI one that was launched with Nickelodeon, which I've also seen the first couple of episodes of now, and that is also very good. And I will do a full review for that in the near future as well. Although I probably want to watch Picard first, because that's approaching the end of its 3rd season, so I want to do a retrospective on all of Picard, because I have things to say about Picard. But yeah, Strange New Worlds very explicitly picks up off of the back of Discovery. And there's a lot of people out there that will like to argue that Discovery is not canon to Star Trek. I mentioned this way back when I discussed, does canon really matter? There's a lot of people who will like to argue that, no, Discovery isn't canon. It's not true Star Trek, etc., etc. I'm sick of that idea. Discovery is coming to an end now, and people are saying, oh, look, it was never good. All the shows that people are claiming they like came about because of Discovery. Lower Decks wouldn't exist without Discovery. Neither would Picard, neither would Strange New Worlds. They would not exist without Discovery. If Discovery hadn't come out and been as successful as it was, these modern Star Trek shows would not exist. Okay, the last time Star Trek was on television, it got cancelled. Star Trek Enterprise got cancelled. And I liked Star Trek Enterprise, but it got cancelled. Okay? Discovery is coming to an end after its season 5, which is coming out later this year or early next year, I believe. And I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to see what they do following it. There's something like 9 different shows in various stages of production now, because there's like 4 others in pre-production, or scripting or pitching or whatever. So yeah, but Strange New Worlds. The reason why Strange New Worlds follows Discovery is because season 1 and 2 of Discovery are set in 2254, I want to say, which is around 7-8 years before Kirk's first season in Star Trek, the original series. And, they detail this prequel of the Klingon War, but season 2 especially, which follows in the aftermath of the Klingon War, features Pike and Spock. So Christopher Pike and Lieutenant Spock, as well as number 1, Christopher's number 1. Now, Christopher Pike takes over as captain of Discovery for season 2. And he's played by Anson Mount, and he's absolutely fantastic. He's trying to help the crew of Discovery, including Michael Burnham, who is Spock's adoptive sister, to find Spock, who has gone missing. Okay, Spock is played by Ethan Peck, who does a perfectly admirable job taking over the role from Leonard Nimoy and Zachary Quinto, both of whom were fantastic depictions of Spock. But I think Ethan Peck is very, very good. I was dubious about him at first, but no, he nails it. He's very, very good. And because of that, because of just how they're used in Discovery Season 2, and also how Discovery Season 2 explicitly follows up on plot lines from The Cage, which is the original Star Trek pilots. So Christopher Pike did appear in the original series. He appeared in the original pilot, The Cage, which also featured Leonard Nimoy as Spock. He was played by Jeffrey Hunter in that. The Cage was not a particularly successful pilot. It's very Star Trek, and there's a lot in it that shows what Star Trek would eventually become, especially the original series. It's very much an adventure story. It's quite interesting. There's a lot of cerebral elements. There's a lot of quite clever moments in it. But on the whole, it's not the best episode to debut the new show. And I can see, there's elements that the production team weren't happy with. They weren't happy with Jeffrey Hunter's performance as Pike, things like that. So, and Majel Barrett as number 1, they also weren't happy with, which I think is stupid because she's brilliant in it. And so they retooled the pilot. They came back, and that's where we got the second pilot, which is where No Man Has Gone Before. Which featured obviously William Shatner in the role as Kirk, Leonard Nimoy as his first officer Spock, and so on, and Star Trek was born. However, Christopher Pike reappeared again because obviously the footage for The Cage had been shot. So as a cost-saving measure, a point in season 1 of the original Star Trek series, they decided to reuse the footage from The Cage, cleaned up and, tightened up and given a framing story. And in that framing story, they had Spock kidnap um, Christopher Pike. Well, not kidnap, take Christopher Pike on board the Enterprise and set a course for Talos 4. Okay. Talos 4 is the planet that is visited in the original Cage, and it has been in quarantine ever since. And to the point that revisiting it carries the death penalty. It's the only Starfleet crime that still carries the death penalty. And so Kirk has to lead a tribunal to find out exactly what happened there. And Pike is horribly wounded. He's been burned by Delta radiation, and he is confined to a chair that can only, his only way of communicating is beeping once for yes and twice for no, which, by the way, is really terrible considering the level of Star Trek technology, even in the 23rd century, even as depicted in the original Star Trek show from the 60s. Like, I mean, the computer in the original Star Trek was nowhere near as advanced as the computer that we got later on in the Next Generation. But and the Next Generation introduced holograms and other things like that. But still, the beep chair that Pike ends up in really doesn't seem fair. It really doesn't seem like that's the best they could have done. But hey ho, it is what it is. And yeah, because Pike has had this horrific accident that's led him confined to this chair, this is why Spock is taking him back to Talos 4. And this is in the episode The Menagerie. And, like I said, this episode follows up on plot threads from The Cage. Now, all of that is known going into Discovery Season 2 and Strange New Worlds. And so Discovery, being set in the middle ground between the original season and after The Cage, was able to play with Pike. And what they did was during the course of Discovery is a very serialized show. Each season tells a very specific story arc. And season 2 was no different. And as part of the story arc for the season, they needed a time crystal, which they could only get from the Klingons. So Pike goes to Boreth, the Klingon monastery, to get a time crystal. And this is also after he's they found Spock on Talos 4. Spock was having trouble as well, so Burnham took him to Talos 4, where Pike also re-met Vina, who was the female lead from The Cage, who reappears in The Menagerie. And in The Menagerie, the original series episode that showed the events of The Cage, Pike ends up going back to Talos 4 and living the rest of his life with Vina. So they recast and they cast a new actress as Vina, and they showed that there's still this really strong connection between her and Pike. It was lovely. They even started that episode by showing footage from The Cage as like the previously on Star Trek in a really 60s kitsch way. Absolutely lovely. And yeah, but anyway, the episode of season 2, and I've forgotten what it's called. I think it's Where Suffering Has No Lease. Discovery tends to have some quite verbose titles. Um, and yeah, Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach, I think it's called. And basically, Pike gets the Klingon time crystal, but when he reaches out to touch it, he sees his future. And he sees the accident that leaves him suffering these horrific wounds that basically melt his skin, saving the lives of some cadets from a training accident in an engine room. And he suffers this horrific, damaging radiation burns that leave him confined to the chair. And he sees this as his future. But the monk that he's with tells him that if he takes that crystal, that future becomes set in stone. And Pike says, I think the line is absolutely brilliant. He says, let me find the actual quote. Sorry, the episode isn't called Lift Us So Suffering Cannot Reach. That's an episode of Strange New Worlds, which we'll be talking about later because it's a very good episode. No, the episode from Discovery is called Through the Valley of the Shadows. and it's episode 12, I believe, of the second season of Discovery. And Pike's quote, which is absolutely fantastic. He sort of psychs himself up first and says, you're a Starfleet captain, you believe in service, sacrifice, compassion, and love. And then he turns around and says, I am not going to abandon the things that made me what I am because of a future that contains an ending I hadn't foreseen for myself. And it's such powerful, powerful quote, and solidifies just how good of a character Christopher Pike is, because he is just so accepting of what his fate is and what that means for his future, and he does it because not only does it help the universe, it also helps his friends. And I think I was already really fond of Pike by this point in the season, and like I said, this is like the penultimate story arc before the two-part finale. And I was already fond of Pike, but that solidified for me that Pike is now one of my favorite Star Trek characters. He's so good, and it's so brave and noble, and then the elements that adds to everything we know about Pike from the original series, um, because it recontextualizes it and makes us realize that he knew he knew about his accident before it happened, which means even after it happened, he knew that was going to be his future, and he was okay with it because of what it meant. That's brilliant. That's prequel storytelling done right. I get very nervous around prequels because they do limit things. They limit the amount of stories that you can tell. And there's a really good example of that from Strange New Worlds, which I will be talking about later on. But they do limit certain things, but adding an element like this is enabling you to recontextualize something that came years later, years earlier, sorry. And Star Trek Enterprise also did that as well. Not to the best, but like elements of things like the temporal Cold War, showing that a lot of factions were trying to prevent the formation of the Federation. It made it an interesting story worth seeing. It wasn't always handled the best, but it was worth seeing, you know? And did lead to some great stories. Like, as bad as some episodes of Enterprise are, there are some very good stories in there, especially in season 3. But anyway, Strange New Worlds. So, Strange New Worlds runs for 10 episodes. And it is very explicitly a sequel to the character arcs set up in Discovery Series 2. Season 2, sorry. Specifically around the characters that we see that recur in this show, which are Anson Mount's Christopher Pike, Ethan Peck's Spock, and Rebecca Romaine's Una Chin Riley, or Number One. And they all return in Strange New Worlds, leading the Enterprise. So they're all back on the Enterprise. We get to see them exactly where they should be. And what we get is 10 episodes that I think are all very, very strong and are quite full as well. These are episodes with a lot in. And where most of modern Star Trek has been very serialized, like I said, Discovery tells, each season tells a long arc, and yes, the episodes are kind of chapters breaking that up, with separate adventures that all build towards this greater whole. But it's very serialized. Picard is very similar. In fact, Picard, if anything, I would argue is more serialized, because each season only being 10 episodes feels more like a 10-hour movie, in that they're not separate episodes. They are very much parts of a story. This is part one, part two, part three, part four. Whereas Discovery is more sort of chapter one. The chapter itself is quite self contained, but it does have elements that lead into the next bit. So that's the difference between Discovery and Picard. Lower Decks is played more for comedy, does have some story arcs running through it, but for the most part is very episodic. A lot of older Star Trek was very, very episodic. Things like the original series and Next Generation, especially, were very episodic, and Star Trek Voyager as well. So many of Voyager's episodes, no matter how incredible they could be or how high the stakes could be, would always default back to the status quo, to the point it really used to wind me up, especially off the back of Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine, while being episodic, did have ongoing character arcs and ongoing story arcs that kept changing and evolving, so that while not every episode directly led into the next, although some did, not every episode did, but while some did, there was a definite change in tone from season to season, and the characters changed and evolved from episode to episode. Like, if a character had gone through some quite traumatic events, you could feel, or some quite life-changing events, you got the feeling that those might come up again later on. They didn't always. Like, sometimes some things that maybe should have had more impact were treated a bit more episodically, like some of the O'Brien Must Suffer episodes, which is a bit of a trope where Cole Meany's Chief O'Brien goes through some traumatic stuff and then kind of is back to normal by the end of the episode. But character relationships changed, dynamics changed. In the case of some of my favorite characters, the supporting characters like Nog and Garrick, the huge changes happened between their first and last episodes. They are almost completely different characters. And Strange New Worlds, to me, feels like the best representation of that style of Star Trek storytelling. And I've commented before about how Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek show because of what it did, because of how it told its stories. And it always felt to me very much a precursor of how modern stories are told, because a lot of modern shows do have that very sort of even if it's an episodic nature, there's this ongoing story arc, whether it's something like Battlestar Galactica or the Arrowverse or Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or Yellowstone or whatever. There's always an ongoing story, even if there's like a story that is done in that particular episode. Strange New Worlds isn't quite at that level, right? It is much more episodic than everything we've had before, and much more episodic than a lot of modern TV is, because a lot of modern TV is not episodic in that way. And what I mean is, each episode of Strange New Worlds can stand alone. You could just watch that one episode and it will stand alone. It will tell you a nice, solid, concise story. However, if you watch the whole season, if you watch from episode to episode, you will notice character arcs. You will notice these characters changing and evolving as their stories change. And that, to me, is what it makes Strange New Worlds worth watching. And what makes it one of the better Star Trek shows. Because these characters are changing and evolving every episode. Some of the changes are small, some of them are large, but there are changes happening. And in the case of some of those characters, those story arcs, those character arcs pay off by the end of the season. The big example being Pike. Okay, so Pike goes into this series knowing what his future is and being quite despondent about it. Obviously, it's relatively soon after the end of Discovery Season 2. He knows what his future is. He's not happy about it. He's accepted it, but he's not happy about it. He's taken a leave of absence from Starfleet, etc. He gets brought back into Starfleet to rescue number one, who has gone missing on a mission. And the mission she has gone missing on is a mission that is a direct fallout from the end of Discovery Season 2, which also makes me really wonder at the people who say, oh, Discovery isn't canon, when that first episode of this show, which they all claim to love, follows directly on from Discovery. Like, just this whole show would not exist without Discovery at every level. In terms of, it wouldn't have been made, it wouldn't exist, the characters wouldn't work, the setting wouldn't work, that first episode wouldn't work, nothing would work without Discovery here. And yeah, so Picard comes back. Pike returns to Starfleet, helps Una, deals with the issue. It's very, very good story, the first episode. It's probably one of the weaker ones of the season, but it does a very, very good job of bringing everything together. And the final scenes of it are very good. So yeah, I do like it as an episode. But you know, they come in, and by the end of the season, by the end of that episode, Pike is back in command of the Enterprise, and he's willing to, stick with Starfleet for a bit longer and do what he can while he can. By the end of the season, though, he starts toying with the idea of, could he avoid his fate? Could he do something about it? And like I said, there's episodes along the way where he, is there a way he could save himself? Is there a way of, the episode I mentioned earlier, lift us where suffering cannot reach? He's shown the amazing medicine of this planet, and he learns about this amazing technology they have and what it could do for him, but he would have to agree to stay on that planet and never leave. And I'll go into reasons why he doesn't later on. And then by the end of the season, he gets to toy with the idea of maybe changing his future. And the final episode actually shows what might happen if he did that. It's very good. And I think that taking that idea of ongoing character arcs, and not all of these character arcs are concluded, like some of them have laid new groundwork that are now going to be developed, and some of them that aren't even going to pay off necessarily in this season, but have already recontextualized scenes in the original show. For example, one of the characters in this show is Christine Chapel. She's played by Jess Bush, who does a brilliant job playing her. And she is a civilian nurse. She's not even a Starfleet nurse at this point. And she's working in sickbay. And obviously, she gets close to Spock. And we learn that she's got quite a traumatic, well, not traumatic, turbulent relationship history. And she gets very close to Spock and actually helps Spock through some quite dark moments, some quite emotional moments at some points. And anyone who's seen the original series will know that the version of Christine Chapel that appears in that show, played by Majel Barrett, is in love with Spock, like openly in love with Spock. And in the episode The Naked Time, she actually confesses that love, which is, again, one of the earliest episodes of the original Star Trek show. She confesses that love to Spock. That scene now plays so much more powerfully because of the connections to this character's histories that we see here. And I think that makes it work really, really well. And so, yeah, I think Strange New Worlds is great. So yeah, I'm going to give you a bit of information about it, the characters, the episodes. But yeah, so I might get into some spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen it, if anything I've said has already swayed you to watching it, if you're already a Star Trek fan, even if you're not a Star Trek fan, actually, I'd heartily recommend it. It's only 10 episodes. Give the first one a try, see what you feel. Um, but yeah, I think Strange New Worlds is quite possibly the best Star Trek show we've had in a very, very long time. Um, Helped by an amazing cast of characters and just some great, great storytelling. Like every episode in this feels like a mini film. They're self-contained, but there is so much going on in them. So many sets and scenes and changes and twists and turns in the story, and or little character moments, or there's no quiet moments. Every moment feels like it's doing something, it's setting something up. So good. It's really good. So yeah, I heartily recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. I definitely recommend it. But yeah, I'm going to go a bit more into the characters and plots. So, like I said, there may be some spoilers. I'll try to keep it relatively spoiler free, but I'm going to talk about the contents of the episodes. So yeah, if you want to go in completely blind, now's your chance to stop and come back to this later. So yeah, until next time, or see you on the other side. So I've already mentioned some of the characters. So there's Anson Mount, Captain Pike, Ethan Peck as Spock, Jess Bush as Christine Chapel. Well, we also get Rebecca Romaine as number one. Then we also get Christina Chong as Lan Noonien-Singh. Now, when that character was announced, a lot of Star Trek fans pointed out that her name is the same name as Khan Noonien-Singh, who is obviously one of the most iconic villains in Star Trek, played by Ricardo Montalban in both the original series episode Space Seed, as well as the second Star Trek film, The Wrath of Khan, or Benedict Cumberbatch in Star Trek Into Darkness, although the less said about that, the better, as far as I'm concerned, because that's not a great film. Now, Lan is introduced as the security chief, and she is well aware of her relation to Khan. However, she is not augmented. But her knowledge of augments does play a part in her character interactions with another character, which I'll get to in a bit. Now, Lan, however, is much more notable in the two episodes in which she gets like a large primary focus for her relationship with the Gorn. In this point in the timeline, the Federation and the Gorn are at more strained relations. And Strange New Worlds has actually done something to recontextualize the Gorn as well, to expand and develop them by saying that basically what they've done is they've said that the Gorn are almost animals in a way. They've redone them in a way that's very similar to the Xenomorphs from the Alien franchise, in that they capture slaves and use them as breeding sacks almost. And they birth their infants inside other beings that then tear their way out and will eat the victims, and then fight for dominance until there's only one or two left. And Lan and her family were captured by a Gorn's ship, and Lan managed to escape, but her family didn't. So she saw what happened to them. She saw them get used and devoured. And I tell you what, it's a very dark element to add to Star Trek. And makes the Gorn more threatening as a race. Um, because the Gorn up until now have been kind of played for jokes. I mean, there's the episode Arena in the original series, which features the Gorn, and the stuntman is kind of quite slow while fighting Kirk. Um, because he's in a giant rubber suit in the middle of the desert. Um, but that's a limitation of the time. There was another Gorn that was used in A Mirror Darkly, which was the Enterprise Mirror Universe episode. And that Gorn was full CGI. It was a bit more threatening. And then the only other time we've really seen them has been in the background of Lower Decks episodes. Like there's an episode where Rutherford has all these um snapshots of memories from a secret away mission that he got taken on. And at one point there was a Gorn wedding that they ended up crashing. And very little context is given because they cause a riot there. It's so bizarre. But yeah, we've never seen any Gorn children, any Gorn infants. So yeah, it's an interesting idea and quite terrifying. Like the episode that actually utilizes them in that way is very good. It has problems, which I'll probably get to, but it is good. Um, there's two other main characters who are new, and then a couple of other characters who return from Star Trek: The Original Series. So the other main character who is new is Lieutenant Erica Ortegas, who is played by Melissa Navia. Um, she's very good. I think she's a lot of fun. Um, she's the helmsman. Um, she's quite cheeky. She's got a very kind of bold personality, very fun. She's got a lot of good one-liners. She's not really had an episode to really shine yet. I suppose the closest she gets is the season finale, um, but it's not quite her. And then again, the other episode that she gets to shine is the Elysian Kingdom, which is great for the actress, but again, she's not playing herself because of the way that episode works. But yeah, I think she's very good. There's also Bruce Horak, who is actually blind. The actual actor himself is registered blind, and he plays an Anar called Hemmer. Now, the Anar appear in Star Trek Enterprise. They're an offshoot of the Andorian race who are all born blind. And yeah, so having a blind actor playing a blind character, I think is great and a really good one for representation. Um, there are some issues with it, which I'll get to, but not any issues with his performance. It's more issues with what they do with the character. The character himself is great. He again is a lot of fun. He's very deadpan, but it means that he gets some great line delivery. And one of his best episodes is the Elysian Kingdom, where he is one of the only characters not affected by what's affecting the rest of the crew, and so he has a lot of fun playing up to it. The actors in that episode all seem like they're having fun, just hamming it up, but he's actually hamming it up as his own character, which is so much more fun. And then there are two other characters who reappear from the original series. Well, there's actually a few more if I count some of the recurring characters, but in the main cast, there is Celia Rose Gooding, and they play a younger version of Uhura. So she is Cadet Nyota Uhura, and she is on the Enterprise for her training rotation. And again, this is another one that recontextualizes so much of the original Star Trek because Uhura was just someone who seemed to know the Enterprise inside and out and seemed to do so much on the ship. Like she knew. There were so many episodes where Uhura was just helping out, doing stuff that wasn't manning the communications console. She'd be repairing a circuit inside a duct, or doing this, that, and the other. She was always helping out. And she does that in the movies as well. There's a lot of times in the movies where you see her doing other stuff, and it's great. like th- Showing that she's a cadet. She served on the ship. She did a turn in security. She did a turn in engineering. She was doing a full cadet rotation, working around a starship. It's great. Yeah, love it. And their performance is absolutely amazing. Like, their performance is a lot of fun, and they feel like Uhura, despite carrying themselves very, very differently. Like, for example, Celia Rose Gooding has very short hair, whereas Nichelle Nichols, in the original show, had this amazing 60s updo. So it's clearly a much younger version of the character, but she still feels very quintessentially Ahura. Like, she sings. Um, she in one episode she sings, and it's like Uhura used to sing quite, has quite a few episodes where she sings in the original. Um, and yeah, she just feels very much like Uhura. Um, Another one that recurs from the original series is Joseph Mbenga. Um, Joseph Mbenga is a doctor. In this, he's played by Abs Olusanmokun. I probably butchered that name. Um, and yeah, he the actor is great in this. I've seen the actor in a couple of other things. Most famously, um, I believe he was in the Defenders Netflix show, where he was playing a villain. He didn't last very long in that, but he was good enough in the role. Now, Mbenga is a character that I knew from the original series from the episode A Private Little War. He does appear in a couple of others as well. And he was basically the doctor on the Enterprise when McCoy was off ship. Um, and again, one of the more prominent characters, because it's an African American actor playing a person of color in the 60s, as in a position of power. He was the doctor. He was an actual doctor. He wasn't a nurse like Chapel was. He was an actual doctor, specialized in Vulcan biology, Vulcan medicine. And Mbenga in this gets a lot of development, a lot of time to shine. He has a child in this, who you know, we find out is ill, and he's trying to find a cure for her. And he's also so personable and lovely, very softly spoken as well, which Mbenga was in the original show. And obviously the actor here has kept that decision. However, the actor here is also more thickly accented than Mbenga is in the original show, at least to my recollection. And so, that's the biggest difference, I think, though. Um, but yeah, he's great. It's a lot of fun, and he's got a real nice chemistry with Chapel. The two of them bounce off of each other really well. Um, so yeah, that was great to see. There's a few other characters as well. The two biggest ones that I want to mention are Dan Jeanette, who plays George Samuel Kirk. Now, George Kirk does appear in the original series, where he is a corpse. Uh, I've forgotten exactly which episode it is. Taste of Armageddon, I believe. And he's Kirk's brother, obviously Kirk's older brother, who is governor of a colony, or working on a colony, and Kirk finds his body, and they turn the body over, and it's William Shatner with a stick-on mustache. So in this, he appears, and we reveal that he's a friend of Pike's. He's a science officer, and you know, Pike brings him on board the Enterprise. Um, so again, it's nice to see him. Nice to see him get development. And we see elements of his brother in him, but he is also a very different character. There's also T'Pring, who is Spock's betrothed, um, who in the original series appears only in the episode of Mock Time, um, where obviously her engagement to Spock breaks down because she's pledged herself to another, and that takes place during his Pon farr. In this, though, we see that their engagement is real, and these two have very clear feelings for each other, very well developed feelings for each other. Um, and she's played by Gia Sandhu in this, who does a great job. Um, and because playing Vulcans is hard, a lot harder than I think a lot of people expect. For me, the best vocal performances, the best Vulcan performances in Star Trek are always the ones that have a level of warmth to them. Obviously the archetypical one that everyone thinks of when they think of the Vulcans is Spock. Spock is the first Vulcan we're introduced to. He's the most developed Vulcan we're introduced to. The Vulcans obviously hide their emotions, they suppress them, but they do have emotions. They do still feel. And that's very much true of Spock. He has emotions and he feels his emotions quite strongly. He just contains them. And so there is a lot of warmth and nuance to Spock's performance. And I think all three actors who have played Spock have done that very, very well. And there's a few other actors who have played Vulcans at different points in the show who I think have also done very great jobs with the role. One that prominently springs to mind is Robin Curtis, who played the second version of Sarvik in Star Trek 3 and Star Trek The Voyage Home, and then played another character later on in the Next Generation 2 part of The Gambit, although in that I believe she was a Romulan posing as a Vulcan, or a Vulcan posing as a Romulan, one of the two. But yeah, she was playing a Vulcan character again. And again, she plays it with a lot of nuance and levels to it. Whereas, following on from Kirstie Alley, who played Savick in The Wrath of Khan, although Kirstie Alley as Savick is a bit more emotional, not quite to the extent of Kim Cattrall's Valeris in Star Trek 6, who is much more openly emotional. She's played quite haughty, actually. I think that was more the direction that Kim Cattrall was given, rather, because Kim Cattrall's a good actress, so I think that was the direction she was given. But there's a lot of Vulcan actors, especially I'm thinking more the bit part actors throughout, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and a few others, and even some of the main ones like Jolene Blaylock, who played T'Pol, in some of her performances as well. And, Tim Russ doesn't suffer from this as much when he plays Tuvok. But again, there's elements of it in his performance sometimes. They play the Vulcans very coldly, and almost coming across as cruel to a lot of their colleagues. That's not what the Vulcans are. The Vulcans still care about people. They still have emotions for people. They just suppress their emotions. They still have them. And I think Gia Santo as T'Pring does a great job here because she shows, that she has these very complex emotions for Spock. And she has very complex emotions about the fact that Spock has gone back to Starfleet, because that restricts their relationship. And they've also expanded her and given her a role within Vulcan society. She hunts down like Vulcans who have rebelled, emotional rebels. They have a specific name in this, but Vulcans who have chosen not to embrace the path of logic and have chosen to embrace their emotions instead, which obviously the Vulcans clamp down on because of the Romulans. But we don't know that at this point in the timeline. But obviously, the connections with the Romulans that they have, and the fact that the Romulans were a more emotional offshoot of their race. But yeah, the scenes between Spock and T'Pring in this show, you do feel that they care very strongly for each other. There is a real, genuine love there, despite the fact that neither of them are very emotional. It's such a very delicate balance to pull off, and I think they both do it fantastically well. And like I said, it's something that I've seen so many actors playing Vulcans fail to do. um, you know, like I said, even Jolene Blaylock, who was playing T'Pol, she comes across as cold so much in season 1 and 2, especially. Um, season 3, she becomes more emotional, and obviously she gets better at the character. The character is able to show more emotion, and it means that by the time we get to season 4, where she's back to suppressing those emotions again, she's got the hang of playing that character by that point. But some of the other Vulcan actors in there, like T'Pau, was very emotional. I understand the Vulcans in Enterprise were a bit different anyway. But yeah, playing Vulcans, I wouldn't want to play a Vulcan. I don't think I'm too emotional. I couldn't play a Vulcan. I'd be much better suited to play a Klingon if I was going to play any of the alien races in Star Trek. Big emotions, loud and brash. Um, laughing heartily and growling and glaring, all that sort of stuff. I couldn't play a Vulcan. There's so much nuance to it. And yeah, I think she does it really, really well. And I think she should be commended for that. Um, the only other character I can think of that recurs from the original show is Lieutenant Kyle, the transporter chief. Um, he is played in this by Andre Day Kim. So I think that does mean the character is race changed. Although I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest. If it's even meant to be the same Kyle. But the Kyle in the original show and Wrath of Khan, where he reappears, was played by John Winston. So, they have changed him, I think. But I don't necessarily see a huge issue with that if that's the case. Some other people did see an issue with it, and some other people saw a very definite issue with the recasting of Robert April, who appears in the first episode and I think one of the others, who is played by Adrian Holmes in this, a African American actor. Robert April only appeared in the animated series, and as I said in my canon episode a while ago, um, that's pretty much his only appearance. And he appears in that season, that series, which has always had a dubious canonicity among Star Trek fans and even among Gene Roddenberry himself. In Star Trek production teams, it's only recently that it's been declared canon again. And so for people to suddenly say, "Oh, you can't have Robert April be black because he was white in the animated show," it's again standing by canon that they've never really respected or honored. Which, yeah, I don't get it. No, sorry. You've lost my sympathy with this. Um, but yeah, so that's the cast. Most of the other changes to the main characters, like there's some significant ones with number one, like the fact she has actually got a name now. Una Chin Riley. And again, I really like the name Una because it leads to number one. It makes sense why she's called number one when her first name is Una. Um, but a lot of her revelations become very plot focused, relating to the episodes that she's in where she gets focused. So I would rather talk about that in the episode bit in a minute. Um, but yeah, as you can see, it's a very good cast, a nice mix of original characters and characters from the original series that we can flesh out a bit more. And obviously, there's a lot of you know recurring recurring characters that are completely new. Um, they're not all characters that we've seen before. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. And I think the cast are great and their story arcs are great. Like really great. And I've already spoken about Pike, Spock, a lot of his major stuff is tied to Pring. Una is stuff that's plot relevant. Christine, I've already kind of mentioned her development, and then obviously I've spoken about all the others here. But yeah, I think if you're a fan of any of these characters in the original show, the ones that reappeared here, and you want to see more about them, especially Uhura, Christine, um, and Spock, I think this is definitely worth your time. I mean, this is worth your time anyway, but especially if you're a fan of those characters. And you'll fall in love with other characters as well when you watch it, like Lan and Pike and Mbenga and Hema. So, go for it. Go for it. Go and watch the show. It is great. But yes, let's talk about the episodes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the episodes, and then I'm going to finish this episode, I think. But yeah. Right. So just to talk a little bit about the episodes of Strange New Worlds. The first episode of the series is called Strange New Worlds. And as I said before, features uh, Pike and Spock leading a mission to rescue Una from a planet. She approached this planet because they detected a warp signature there. An antimatter signature, I believe. So they were trying to make first contact with what they thought was a warp civilization. However, throughout the course of the episode, it's revealed that no, this planet actually has a lot more in common with 21st century Earth. It's, nation states that are at war with each other. And the governments of the world have in fact developed antimatter missiles because they observed the final battle from the end of Star Trek Discovery season 2, you know, and so they are, you know, they're one of a few planets that have observed that battle, but in this case, they're a pre-warp civilization, and so they were able to reverse engineer the antimatter weapons based on what they saw, which I think is very, very clever. And Pike tries to appeal to them towards the end by saying that, you know, the course they are on, unless they change, is very, very similar to the course that Earth has had in the Star Trek timeline. And he demonstrates this by showing which something that was quite controversial at the time, which was the footage from the January 6th Capitol coup in America. And he shows this to them along with a string of other news footage as well as fictional footage showing events that he describes as starting with the Second American Civil War, leading to a eugenics war, and then World War III. And we see the nuclear destruction of several cities, including New York and Paris. So this suggests that, you know, this is a way of Star Trek incorporating modern politics into its future history by saying that we're on the course for a second American Civil War, and this is probably the most overt political commentary in Star Trek, like ever, like using actual news footage of at the time, very relatively, ugh, can't get my words out. At the time, it was a relatively recent event. You know, Star Trek has made political allegory since the very beginning. Like there are episodes in the original series explicitly calling out racism and civil rights and the Vietnam conflict while those things were happening, but nothing to this level. We've not had explicit, using the footage of a recent event and saying it's going to lead to a second American Civil War. Because this is something that people are actually discussing. Like I saw uh, an op-ed piece for this the other day. Like, is America on its way to a second civil war? On the news of the Trump arrest, Trump indictment or whatever it is that's going on over there at the minute. I'm trying to avoid the news for my own mental health. So yeah, this is. It's good. I like it. A lot of people hated it. I love it. This is exactly the sort of Star Trek I want. Um, and yeah, this episode does a great job of introducing us to all the characters. Lan gets quite a lot of focus in this episode as well. We learn about the colony ship she was on, how it was attacked by the Gorn, uh, and they were taken to what she describes as a planetary nursery. So yeah, it's very dark. We also get to meet George Kirk in this episode. And yeah, Pike comes back to Starfleet. And yeah, it's a good episode. It's a lot of fun. It's most dependent on everything that's come before. I think you do need to at least be aware of the events of Discovery um, to enjoy this, but I think it will catch you up if you are not. And it's focused very much on Pike. But yeah, Spock, T'Pring, Lan all get some great moments to shine. Spock and T'Pring's relationship is actually really good as well. Like, she refers to Chris. Spock refers to him as Captain. She refers to him as Chris, which suggests that he's on quite friendly terms with them both, which I quite like. Although it would be logical for a Vulcan to use his real name, but she could have called him Christopher, not Chris. Chris suggests a warmth, or maybe Chris just said, just call me Chris. I don't know, but either way, it's a nice little touch, and I like it. Like, he calls them up in the middle of a quite a romantic evening and says, Spock, are you naked? And she's like, no, Chris, but he was about to be. It's a special night. She openly says that to Pike. Yeah, I like it. It's a good episode. It's a very good introduction to this cast, this crew, and just sets them up for some nice new adventures. Also, the title sequence is beautiful, and a lot of the music in this show is great as well, echoing older themes while still being new iterations of it. Um, and the title sequence is no exception to that. Like, it sounds like the original Star Trek theme, but is also very clearly a new theme, a new iteration of those old notes. The second episode, Children of the Comet, again, not one of the best of the season, but still very, very good. Like a great quality episode. Focuses quite well on Uhura. Kirk gets some stuff to do, so does Spock. Um, and yeah, this is very definitely the Uhura episode for me. You know, they find this comet that's approaching a pre-warp planet and could possibly end up destroying it. They go to try and divert the comet, and they've beamed a landing party onto the comet. The comet might be artificial, um, but there's also an alien race who are shepherding the comet through space and allowing it to, they sort of worship it, and they're letting it go where they want it to. Um, and yeah, I think it's a great little episode. I quite like this one. Like I said, it's not great. It's not one of the strongest, but it is good, and it does develop some more of the plots. Like, for example, we learn in this episode that Pike has learned the names of the 5 cadets that he is destined to save, and he knows who they are and where they are currently. You know, um, Uhura works out that Chapel is attracted to Spock. You know, and Uhura kind of hints it to Spock as well. Um, and Ortegas also gets a couple of great lines in this episode. You know, there's a bit of a battle sequence, and he gives her like Pike gives her free reign to decide what she wants to do. So she, im- you know, they always say like attack pattern or evasive pattern, Alpha whatever, or Pike 1 or April 3 or Riker 4, based on different things in the series. And she does her own one, which is like Ortegas 1. It's like, so she's clearly been working on her own maneuvers and how to maneuver the ship. um so yeah, that was quite fun. Yeah, I did enjoy this one. And yeah, it was just a fun one seeing the crew all together. Um, and the resolution is quite good. There's also a really nice moment at the start of this episode where Uhura gets invited to dinner with the captain, and you see Pike cooking for everyone. And he's got the whole command crew in there, and this is your introduction to Hema, and Uhura, you know, I think Uhura offends Hema at first. Um, but we also see that Spock and Hema are quite close, probably to do with being, the only aliens on the ship, um, or the only aliens we see in the command crew. But but yeah, it's quite fun. Like Uhura turns up, she's really nervous. She's a cadet. She turns up in her dress uniform, and Ortegas mocks her for it. And it's just nice. There's a lot of really nice character moments in it. The only character I think who's missing in this episode is Mbenga. I don't think he's actually in this episode at all. Mbenga takes a backseat in some episodes as well. That's always been the case in Star Trek. I think McCoy is the only real exception. Like once DeForest Kelly got added to the cast for season 2 and season 3 of the original series, McCoy appeared a lot more. But the Doctor always tends to get a bit sidelined in Star Trek. Like if there's a story and you need to leave a character out, it's usually the Doctor that gets left out. So yeah, it's just the way it is. I think, if you don't need a scene set in sickbay, you don't, or, some kind of medical problem, you don't need the Doctor. That's just the way Star Trek works, unfortunately. Ghosts of Illyria is a very good episode. It's the third one. There's a contagion that ravages the ship, and this is the episode that reveals Una's backstory. They go to an Illyrian colony which has been abandoned. Pike and Spock end up stuck on the colony, and Una is on the ship and ends up, dealing with this infection. However, Una is infected, but instantly burns it out of herself. And it's revealed that she is Illyrian. And the Illyrians are banned from Starfleet because of their genetic engineering. So, because of the augments, this causes Lan to react to her quite badly when she learns the truth at the end of the episode. It also means that essentially Una shouldn't be in Starfleet and she has the secret. And she confronts that at the end of the episode when Pike, says that he's going to keep her secret and that he's not letting her resign. And she says something about, well, would Pike allow her to stay? Would he stand up for her in that way if she hadn't saved the ship? So yeah, It's a very good episode, and seeing Una in this command position is great. Seeing this this infection, which is basically just making them want to stand near lights. All the characters want to be near light. Um, and then, of course, the reason the infection comes on in the first place is revealed in the end of the episode, and it's because there was a problem with the transporter, because it turns out Mbenga has something in the medical transporter. He has his daughter. His daughter is in the pattern buffer because a few years ago she was diagnosed with a fatal illness, and so he keeps her in suspended animation in the pattern buffer until he can find a cure. And that is so sad. It's sad for her anyway. She's not living a proper life. His daughter Rakia, she is not living a proper life in there. But also it's so hard for Mbenga, and then obviously Mbenga feels terrible that he put the rest of the crew at risk with this. But Una says, we'll help, we'll give you a more dedicated power source, to ensure that this doesn't happen again, to ensure that there's no danger to Rakia. And, then we get this nice little moment where he brings Rakia out of the buffer and picks up a story that he was reading her called The Elysian Kingdom. And he says he's read it 100 times to her, but, perhaps the ending could change. It's quite nice. There's a lot of really nice character stuff in this. For Una, for Mbenga, even Pike and Spock have some great moments down on the planet together. It's yeah, and then with Lan as well towards the end of the episode, when she learns um, Una's story, because obviously Lan and Una had bonded quite well. So yeah, very good episode. Episode 4, Memento Mori. Memento Mori is focusing on the Gorn. They become the ship comes under attack by the Gorn. And Lan is warning him that, they have to be careful dealing with the Gorn. They have to be ruthless in dealing with them. It's very dark episode. It's quite tense. It's a very Lan focused episode. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff going on. Like, Una ends up injured, the ship ends up very badly damaged, Hema and Uhura end up sort of trapped in part of the ship. And yeah, there's a lot going on. And they end up going through like gravitational anomalies and all sorts to try and deal with the Gorn. And there's a lot of some really great acting, lots of great facial acting from Pike. There's one bit where um, he thinks someone is dead, and then he hears their voice, and you just see this relief dawn on his face, and he can't hide it, and it's done so well because he's got his back towards the crew, so the crew don't see his face, but we see as the audience just that sheer relief on his face. It's so good. And it also adds in something quite good in this episode, which is the idea that there's a Starfleet Day of Remembrance. Throughout the episode, the characters are wearing pins of ships they've previously served on that have lost people to remember them. And I really like that. And I think it's a shame that this was only introduced here, because I would have loved to have seen that in previous episodes, in previous shows. Um, see Cisco do that while remembering his wife, for example. It would just be it's add so many elements to some previous episodes, like when he deals with Mirror Jennifer, for example. So yeah, I like this deck. I like this one. It's a good one. Very tense. Spock Amok, the 5th episode, is um it's much more light-hearted in tone after Memento Mori. And I think that's because obviously Memento Mori, there's parts of it are very, very intense. It reminds me a lot of episodes like Disaster or Starship Down, although not quite to that same extent. The idea that the ship is just battered and under attack, and the crew are cut off, and so on, and everything seems to keep getting worse. um, but Spock Amok is, it's an episode about shenanigans. Like, you know, it's shenanigans and hijinks. Spock and T'Pring spend some time together, um, and end up, yeah, they end up switching bodies. But they end up switching bodies during this quite crucial negotiation with this alien race. And the alien race react differently to whoever they talk about, and Pike eventually works out that they're basically empathic, and they react a certain way to Spock, they react a certain way to Pike, and so on. Um, but yeah, throughout the whole episode, Spock is in T'Pring's body and T'Pring is in Spock's body, and both of the actors do a great job at bringing the subtle nuance of both characters to bear. you know, because there are differences between them. They're both Vulcans, but they are, it's played for laughs. That, like, they say a line to Pike about, because they let him in on what's going on, and they reveal that, he can probably tell the difference because of the drastic differences between them. And and Pike's like, yeah, sure, with like a bemused expression on his face, showing that he clearly does not. um, and then there's also, you know, Chapel gets quite a lot to do in this episode, and we see her relationship with Spock develop because she's having to help to bring, well, Spock into Pring, um, as she's having to perform her own mission. Well, he's having to perform to Pring's own mission. Gets very complicated. And so obviously this means that Chapel ends up getting quite close to Spock and feeling for him, because throughout the episode she's also dealing with relationship stuff. Ortega says, don't get in the middle of a Vulcan relationship. Um, you know, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun this episode. Um, and yeah, the actual it's so light-hearted, and the aliens, the concept of the empathic aliens, I think is great. And then there's also a great subplot in this episode where Una and Lan bust a load of cadets who are doing Enterprise bingo, which got mentioned in a previous episode. And it's like basically cadets doing things to sort of score a bingo. And Lan and Una, both characters who have sort of hidden large aspects of themselves and been very withdrawn, decide to do Enterprise bingo. And so we get this montage of them on the ship, because the ship's also in a space dock at the time. So most of the crew are off ship. And so they do the Enterprise bingo themselves, and some of the ideas are bizarre, like um beaming yourself while chewing gum to restore the flavor. you know or um doing a spacewalk on the hull to get to a certain point, and it's so funny. Just seeing these two quite serious characters, also getting them to bond again after Ghosts of Illyria, and showing, just showing their fun sides, because they're both quite intense characters in their previous appearances, especially, like I said, with Lan in the previous episode. And I think Una was injured in the previous episode as well. So, again, the past few episodes for them have been quite intense. So, seeing them taking a more comedy role, a lot of fun. Um, the sixth episode is the one I mentioned earlier, Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach. Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach shows an idyllic planet, where Pike encounters someone that he's loved in the past, who is on this planet, and you know, there's a holy child called the First Servant, and this planet is idyllic. They've got technology in advance of Starfleet. The First Servant's father is a doctor. He talks about his technology, and Benga reveals that it could be potentially provide a cure for Rakia and her own condition. Pike realized that it could pose a cure for his own future condition. And but the caveat is that they would have to remain on the planet forever. They couldn't leave. And the reason why they don't is because at the end of the episode, in a story idea very much inspired by The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin, it is revealed that the first servant has to sacrifice himself and suffer so that the rest of the planet can have this idyllic life. This child has to be made to suffer, and everyone is aware of it and the horrible suffering that he will go through and how it will eventually lead to his death. And it's revealed that several people have, you know, walked away from this planet, have formed another society without the technology, including the first servant's father who was trying to save his son. It's a great little story. Like I said, it has a lot in common with Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. The planet Majalis is quite lovely. You know, Pike's relationship with the character there, Alora, is very intriguing. And the nice bit about it is Pike's determination to save the first servant, even after he's been beaten back. He's so determined to save the child. He's disgusted by them. He just leaves. He point blank leaves and goes. Um and leaves Alora behind in tears. He intends to report to Starfleet, but Alora says, Majalis isn't part of the Federation. What can they do? And, maybe Pike will feel differently in the future because Pike told Alora about what's going to happen to him, and he's like, no, and leaves. And Mbenga is given something that could possibly lead to a cure by the first servant's father, Gamal. He's given something that could possibly lead to a cure for Rakia in the future. And so yeah, it's a good episode, very Pike focused episode, but again, also with a good subplot on Mbenga. It's a lot of fun, this one. Well, not fun, but it's a very, very good story. Um, it's definitely one of the highlights of the season. Um, and when the season is as strong as it is, saying that this is one of the highlights is very high praise. Episode 7, The Serene Squall. I think for many people is going to be a Marmite episode, in that they're either going to love it or they're going to hate it. And I think the reason for that is there's a lot of elements about this episode which are very camp. And I mean that in the most positive way. And, I'm a queer person. I respond quite well to camp. I think camp is a lot of fun if it's done right. This is done right. Um, there are a lot of people who are complaining about this episode for entirely the wrong thing, namely that the guest actor Jesse James Keitel is trans, and they're playing a character who is also referred to as trans. Um, those sorts of people are not worth listening to ever. There's a lot of pushback on the LGBTQ plus representation in modern Star Trek, but Star Trek is a franchise that has been so overwhelmingly poor in its LGBTQ plus representation for most of its existence that I have no problem with them putting those characters in now. Are they doing it? Is it always done for the best? No, I mean, sometimes, yeah, I think it's always done with the best of intentions. Are the characters always the best? No, maybe not. And they've definitely made mistakes, like the killing of Dr. Colbert in season one of Discovery, which was a very clear bury your gays trope. However, the found family that they've gone for with Discovery, between uh, Hugh Colbert, Paul Stamets, and then Adira and Grey Tal, I think works very, very well. I think that's a brilliant storyline, and the way they're using them is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Um, and some bits are maybe a bit more understated than they could be, like Seven and Rafi's relationship in Star Trek Picard. I think that could be a lot more developed than it is. Um, but they could also be doing a lot worse. And not Boimler, Mariner's relationship in Lower Decks as well is also, it got a nice episode of development in season three, I believe it was. But again, Lower Decks' approach to any sort of topic, whether sexuality, politics, racism, or anything, is always with a bit of a laugh and a joke anyway, which I know does rub some people up the wrong way, very definitely. But I don't think every representation automatically needs to be positive. What I mean by that is not that you should have negative representation, but that we shouldn't be allowed to have LGBTQ plus characters be villains. And Jesse James Keitel in this episode is very clearly the villain of the episode. She is playing Captain Angel, who we were originally introduced to in the role of Dr. Aspen, so the character that she's portraying to be. She drafts the Enterprise into a humanitarian mission, and it turns out to all be part of a trap so that she can um, capture the Enterprise. And she takes special interest in Spock, and Spock and Christine, I think, are the main characters that she leaves on the ship and tries to deal with. And she also brings in T'Pring, because T'Pring, in her role, is able to free the character, one of her prisoners, um, who are at the Vulcan Rehabilitation Center. You know, um, she's Captain Angel is connected to a character that's in, to Pring's custody, essentially. And so she wants to Pring to free him. And I'll come to that character as in a bit. But this episode also has some great stuff into Pring and Spock's relationship. Like, T'Pring is researching human sexuality because obviously Spock is half human. I think that's very interesting. I love that Spock tries to approach Christine and say, I need a friend. I need someone who can speak to about this. And she's very nervous because obviously her advice to Spock is what led to the body swap events of Spock Amok. And so she's very hesitant to get involved in the relationship and give him bad advice or him to overreact. Um, but at the same time, because he's already come to her for advice with the relationship, he it makes sense that he'd treat her like a friend and he'd approach her in that way. And yeah, it's a lot of really nice moments in this episode. Um, but yeah, the highlight for it is Captain Angel. Once she's revealed as who she actually is, as the full-on pirate captain that Angel is, it is absolutely fantastic. Um, they are in this big dramatic role in the center of the ship, taking over the command chair, lounging on it. Oh, it's so much fun. So much fun. And the deception is so thorough that they fool Spock. And, you know, Spock feels betrayed about it. And then, you know, Angel goes on to keep manipulating him and Chapel and, you know, manipulates them to the point that it looks like Spock and T'Pring break up, and Spock declares his love for Chapel and kisses her on the bridge in front of T'Pring to warn T'Pring away so that T'Pring doesn't release the person that Angel wants freed. And then, of course, Pike and the others who are on the prison ship, they managed to strike a revolt and they managed to fight the Enterprise using the Serene Squall, which is the pirate ship. It's great. There's so much fun going on. It's a lot of fun. Um, and again, it's like Spock Amok, where it's light-hearted in tone because the last episode was so intense, and I think it comes at the right. This season is very well paced for that, in that you have these emotional episodes in between. Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach is a very emotional episode, and it's placed between two of the funniest episodes in the season. You know, two of the most light-hearted, optimistic episodes of the season. Um, because, and I think it works. I think it works so well, and you know the, and then of course the final reveal at the end of the episode is revealing who the rebel that Angel wanted freed was, who their partner is that they want freed. It's Cybok, Spock's half brother from Star Trek Five: The Search for Spock, who is currently imprisoned. You know, currently imprisoned by T'Pring and the organization that she works for. So good. And it's like, because the best bit is that means that Cybok is going to come back, and Cybok hasn't been touched outside of Star Trek: The Final Frontier, and Star Trek: The Final Frontier is not a great movie, but I still think Cybok is probably one of the better things in that movie. Like, Lawrence Luckinbill's performance as Cybok is pretty good. His chemistry with Leonard Nimoy as Spock is pretty good. The depiction of like an emotional Vulcan is pretty good. You know, Star Trek Five has problems. It has big, big problems. But Cybok isn't necessarily one of them. And, when we got Discovery and we got Spock in that, we got Burnham as Spock's sister, but Cybok was never mentioned. And so now exploring that, and it's like Cybok's currently in custody. When we meet him in Star Trek Five, he's not. So I reckon that at some point throughout this show, we're going to have Cybok come back, probably with Angel, and get out of prison. And I'm very much looking forward to that. Like, I'm here for that. Um, Episode 8, The Elysian Kingdom. This is the episode I alluded to earlier, where the characters are not playing themselves. Essentially, um, The Elysian Kingdom is the book that Mbenga is reading to Rakia, and it's actually revealed that book is written by Benny Russell, who is the persona assumed by Cisco in the Deep Space Nine episode Far Beyond the Stars, which is an absolute classic. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. It's one of the best depictions of 1950s American racism that I think is in existence. It's absolutely fantastic episode. Um, yeah, absolutely brilliant. But anyway, essentially, something affects the ship and the crew of the ship, with the exception of Mbenga, and Hema. Now, we don't know why Hema isn't necessarily affected, presumably because of his being blind. Whatever has affected the rest of them hasn't affected him. And so essentially, all the characters, all of our main cast, are now taking roles of the characters in the book, The Elysian Kingdom, which is a standard swords and sorcery fantasy fare. And it's so much fun. So much fun. Um, a lot of the characters in this episode are only seen but while believing themselves to be their fantasy counter characters. So Christine is a character called Lady Audrey. Lan is a character called Princess Thalia. Uhura is a character called Queen Neve. So that's a lot of fun. And some of the characters are so different to their normal type. Like Princess Talia is this quite bubbly princess, and it's such a contrast to who Lan normally is. Um, Spock is this kind of dark wizard called Pollux. Pike is this kind of cowardly knight called Sir Armand Rolfe, and you know it's so funny. And Ortegas is this brave knight called Sir Adya, who has this amazing moment where they disarm some soldiers coming towards them, effortlessly, and are now armed to challenge the opponents. And Mbenga is playing the role of King Ridley, but he himself is fully aware of the story. This is the story he reads to his daughter. He knows the story. He knows how the story is meant to go. And he gets Hema alongside, and Hema is hamming it up, but in the best way. But because, like I said, he's hamming it up as Hema. Like he gets given a magic word, and he's using the tricorder or the communicator to like beam people around. But he does it with this big dramatic abracadabra like that. It's absolutely fantastic. So much fun. Um, and yeah, the characters are all getting some great stuff to do. It's a lot of fun. Um, and yeah, the set design for it is incredible. Like they're using the Enterprise sets, but they've dressed them up so that they actually look like fantasy locations. It's really well done. And it's revealed that, the being doing this is this non-corporeal being that has taken Rakia and is can give her a better life as a non-corporeal entity. And godlike, non-corporeal entities were a huge thing in the original series. Less so as Star Trek went on, although they do still exist in the Next Generation era. Um, and so having the resolution to that story, to this story, be that really works for me. Like it really does. The idea that Rakia gets to go and live her life with this non-corporeal entity inside a nebula, and where they can play and experience so much. And we see Rakia briefly as an adult saying goodbye to her father. It's a great episode, and I don't think anyone else at the end of the episode ever remembers what's happened, but it's clearly had an impact on Mbenga, and the episode is absolutely fantastic. For me, it's definitely one of the stronger ones. And in terms of, getting to see Star Trek do a proper fantasy story, which is something that I don't think they've tackled as much. Um, and do it so well. Like, the production on this episode is fantastic, like the redressing of the sets and everything. Absolutely brilliant. So yeah, this is for me is one of the better episodes. Um the next episode, All Those Who Wander. Now, All Those Who Wander is the episode that for me suffers the most from being a prequel. And that is because this is the episode that introduces the infant Gorn. And so we see these baby Gorn attacking the crew while the crew is on a rescue mission. Well, it becomes more of a salvage mission. They detect another ship and they go there. And, you know, the away team sent down to the planet is a new ensign. Well, a new lieutenant, actually. He's recently been promoted. Pike, Spock, Hemmer, Lan, George Kirk, Cadet Uhura. Like I said, there's a new lieutenant, Christine, a nurse, and I think there's one more officer. I believe. I might be wrong. Oh no, and Benga. And Benga goes down as well. And they all beam down. Well, I don't think they beam down. I think they take a shuttle. But they all go down for this rescue mission. And they encounter some aliens. Well, a young. Yeah, they encounter some characters who have escaped um Gorn Planetary Nursery, and the Gorn eggs hatched and killed the crew. And a couple of the others are still alive, and they get encountered by our crew. And again, one of them hatches. And the puppet for the alien, by the way, is absolutely incredible. Um, it's got a really great design. Um, Buckley, I think he's called. And yeah, the eggs inside Buckley hatch, and he's protecting this young girl called Oriana, who's still alive. She's not infected by the eggs, but the ones inside Buckley hatch. They kill Buckley, they kill the nurse, and then they kill Lieutenant Duke, the one who was promoted earlier. And so now we find ourselves in a situation where all the characters that remain, we know that at the very least, Pike, Spock, Mbenga, Christine, and George Kirk, and Uhura all survive. There's 8 characters left, and we know for an absolute fact that 6 of them are going to survive this. And that, to me, really cheapens the episode, which is a shame, because this is a very tense horror episode in a lot of ways. Like, this reminds me a lot of a first season episode of Discovery where they encounter, what was it called? First season episode of Discovery where they encounter a tardigrade on the ruins of Discovery's sister ship. And the tardigrade is chasing them through the ship, and there's elements of that here, and the effects for this are great. Like, a lot of this is done with actual real effects, but it means the only characters who are left are Hemmer, who could possibly die, Lan, who could possibly die, and Oriana, the child that they've rescued. And they're not going to kill a child. So, if they're going to kill anyone and have it matter, it's going to be the Lan or Hemmer. And I think that was a mistake because knowing that so much of the characters put in peril are going to survive invalidates it. And even then, you don't think that Lan and Hemmer are going to die either because they're both in the main cast. But as it happens, no. They defeat the Gorn, but Hemmer does die. Hemmer's been infected with more, he's had Gorn eggs laid inside him by one of the infants, um, using this kind of acid attack that it used. It's not clear. Like, are they born pregnant? They're like tribbles. Um, but yes, anyway, the Gorn are killed, but Hemmer realizes that he's infected and they can't keep him alive until the Enterprise gets there. And so he chooses to sacrifice himself, going out into the cold in the same way that the crew of this ship did. And, he has this tearful goodbye to Uhura, who was questioning her role in Starfleet at this point, and, whether being in Starfleet was the right thing for her. And, we'd seen that she'd bonded with Hemmer quite well, despite their initial frisson. They bonded really well. He'd been serving with her in engineering for a while. That was her final rotation. And yeah, it's quite sad. And I think it's a shame that the only disabled character played by a disabled actor is the one that has to die. Not that I really wanted Lan to die either, but I feel like there was another way to do it. Perhaps another character that could have been included and maybe developed over the past few episodes. It's like there's an episode of Deep Space Nine called The Siege of AR-558, and the only characters that die in that episode are characters outside of the main cast. However, Nog is there, who's not one of the main cast, and Nog gets injured. He loses his leg. And that's a devastating injury for a character who is not one of the main cast, but still someone that the audience knows and cares about. And it's a very devastating injury. And it actually plays up. It leads to possibly my favorite episode of Deep Space Nine, which is It's Only a Paper Moon, which is, Nog dealing with the trauma of that. And I think there was a way of doing something similar here. Maybe not having characters die, but maybe having some more lasting effects on the characters who were there. Like George Kirk. George Kirk is pretty much a blank slate. We could have had something happen to him. He could have lost an arm, lost a leg, been horrifically wounded in some way. Same with Lan. Lan could have, injured herself, trying to stop the Gorn. I don't know. I just think there was ways of doing it without killing Hemmer. But it's a great episode. And then the final episode, A Quality of Mercy, which is absolutely fantastic. And if you haven't seen the original series episode Balance of Terror, watch that first and then watch this. Because essentially, in this episode, Pike debates warning the children that he saves. So they aren't there that day, and he avoids his fate. And in suggesting that, an older version of Pike wearing a version of the uniform from the TOS movies, the Wrath of Khan onwards, appears, and he says he's from that timeline where Pike avoided his fate, and he gives Pike a time crystal so that Pike can see what happens if he does that. And what follows is essentially a retelling of the episode Balance of Terror, however done in such a way where Pike is still in command of the Enterprise, with Spock and Ortegas and Uhura. And so much of the episode echoes those previous, the previous episode, Balance of Terror. There are lines lifted wholesale from that previous episode, camera angles, lighting tricks, music cues. It is fantastic. And they even get another actor to come in and play James Kirk, and he does a brilliant job of capturing everything 60s Kirk was so well. Paul Wesley, his name is. And yeah, I think he does a great job. He's got a lot in common with in his portrayal with Chris Pine, but also a lot in common with William Shatner in the 60s as well. And he even gets a special guest star credit in the opening credits of the episode. It's so good. So good. Um and yeah, it shows that if Pike avoids his fate, that fate befalls someone else. And well, a darker fate befalls someone else. And the entire universe will be changed forever. Like the entire Star Trek universe will be changed forever in a way that is just worse for everyone. It's a fantastic way to end the show and to at least end that chapter of Pike's arc. Because at the end of this episode, Pike knows he cannot avoid his fate. And that there's a very good reason why he can't now. Beyond saving the Discovery, he has another good reason not to. Yeah, I thought this was a brilliant episode, and I thought it's even better if you go back and compare it to Balance of Terror, because it is such an accurate homage, because it's not just a homage, it is a retelling of those events with these characters, and it does it so well. So yeah, definitely the highlight of the season. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. This was only meant to be a smaller review, but this has actually ended up being almost as long as one of my regular episodes. So yeah, I had more to say about this than I thought about why I've enjoyed it so much. I will be working my way through the other Star Trek series. Like I said, I want to... Picard has always been planned for 3 seasons, so once the 3rd season is done and I can sit down and watch it all, I'm going to do like a little retrospective on all of it, because while I've not seen any of season 3 yet, I hear a lot of people who have previously slammed the show for season 1 and 2 turning around and praising it. And I think the problem I have is if they're telling this story, all 3 seasons have to have been part of the same plan and the same story. And so I want to judge them all. While I've seen season 1 and 2 already, I want to judge them all together. And so that's what I'm planning to do when I do Picard. As I said, I'm also started watching Prodigy. I don't know how long it's going to take me to finish that, because I might watch with the kids, because it is a kids show. I watched the first few episodes with my youngest son today. He quite enjoyed it, so I think we might watch more of that together. But yeah, from what I've seen so far, it's a lot of fun, and I'm intrigued to see more of it. So, and I've heard very good things about Prodigy. I wasn't a huge fan of Voyager. I know a lot of Prodigy is following up on Voyager. So whether that will change, change how much I like it. I don't know, but for now I'm about 4 episodes in, and I've quite enjoyed it. And I like the cast. The cast of characters is very good, very interesting, especially Rock-Tak. Rock-Tak is definitely my favourite. And the Protostar is a great little ship, lovely little ship. And it is little as well, it's tiny. Like, I looked it up, it's actually smaller than the Defiant, which was my favourite ship up until this point. Yeah, beyond that, I still need to catch up on season 4 of Discovery. I will probably do a Discovery episode when that eventually finishes. For Strange New Worlds, we've got at least 2 more seasons coming. One is coming later this year, around summertime. One is coming towards the end of next year, I believe. So I will probably review them when they come out. Maybe not week on week, but I might do, again, another full season wrap up like this after season 2, because I plan on doing more reviews like this for things as they drop. Until then, there's still more stuff I need to catch up from last year and earlier this year. I'm planning to review The Last of Us. I'm planning to review the Super Mario Brothers movie. I'm planning to review Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, and then obviously shows like House of the Dragon. So yes, a lot of reviews coming, as well as all of the episodes that I have planned for season 5, the first few which should be with you very, very soon. So look forward to those. Until next time, my friends, you all look after yourselves. Take care of yourself, your physical and mental well-being as best as you can, and do whatever you can to enjoy your day. Okay? I love you all. Thank you for listening. And until next time. Thank you, my friends, for once again joining me on Garhdo Goes Geek. Your continued support for this podcast means the absolute world to me, and I am grateful for every single one of you who stays and listens to one of my episodes. It means the absolute world. Now, if you would like to engage more with me or the podcast, we have a Discord community, small but growing, and we now have commissions open on Ko-Fi. So if there's a topic you would like to see me cover, you can pay me to cover it. All funds will be used for legal purchase of the relevant items where I do not have them. Have a look on the link tree for more information. Until next time, look after yourselves.